November 2004, the USS Nimitz carrier strike group was stationed southwest of San Diego, California. The Nimitz and its various support ships, including the USS Princeton, which is a Ticonderoga class guided missile cruiser, were preparing for combat deployment in the Middle East, and the USS Princeton had an unsolved mystery. Beginning in early November 2004 and persisting for at least 2 weeks, UFOs played cat and mouse with the U.S. Navy off the coast of Baja California. First, the Princeton's fire control officer and his senior chief had detected several puzzling returns on their Spy 1 radar. Those radar returns came from far above the advanced radar scan volume that was higher than 80,000 feet. And whatever the unknown returns were, they were moving from 80,000 feet down to 20,000 feet, where the UFOs would hover for 2 to 3 hours before zipping back up. Some pilots saw UFOs drop down rapidly to only 50 feet above the ocean water in just seconds. Those craft were UFOs, but the military fire control officers called them anomalous aerial vehicles, or AAVs. Adding to the mystery was the fact that the UFOs were always over the same latitude-longitude spot, roughly 70 nautical miles southwest of Tijuana, Mexico. That's about 80 land miles out into the Pacific. The Spy 1 radar that was tracking these mind-blowing UFO maneuvers in November 2004 was at the time the most advanced and powerful radar on Earth. And the military men watching the radar were stunned as the UFOs, quote, descended, hovered, and then zipped away at speeds and turn rates and accelerations that were faster than any known by friendly or threat aircraft, close quote. By November 14th, 2004, at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time, an operations officer aboard the Princeton contacted 2 airborne U.S. Navy jet fighters from the USS Nimitz. The first Super Hornet FA18F fighter jet was piloted by Commander David Fravor, commanding officer of Strike Fighter Squadron 41. His wingman in the second Super Hornet was Jim Slate. They were in routine combat exercises 100 miles southwest of San Diego when the USS Princeton's radio operator asked the pilots to change their course in order to investigate an unidentified radar return observed by the Princeton's own radar. The morning sky was clear and blue over a calm sea, no cloud cover. When the 2 Super Hornet jet fighters reached the latitude and longitude spot that the Princeton had given them, there was nothing in the air or on radar. But in the ocean water below them, they could see, quote, a turbulent oval area of churning water with foam and frothy waves the size of a Boeing 737 airplane. It had a smoother area of lighter color at the center, as if the waves were breaking over something just under the surface. A few seconds later, they noticed an unusual object hovering with erratic movements 50 feet above the boiling water, close quote. Commander Fravor said the object was a bright white elongated egg or Tic Tac candy shape and estimated that it was big, around 46 feet long. He was able to fly straight toward it for about 5 minutes. Now, to be clear, his encounter is not the so-called 34-second gimbal video that has 2 pilots talking about an object on their radar doing a 180-degree rotation without losing altitude. The infrared video of Commander Fravor's encounter is the 2-minute and 45-second silent video of the Tic Tac that leaves the frame at an incomprehensible speed. Later, Commander Fravor would say, quote, I have no idea what I saw. It had no plumes, wings, or rotors, and it outran our F-18s, close quote. What happened next increased the high strangeness of the unidentified craft. After this short break, to share his firsthand, up-close experience will be U.S. Navy Commander David Fravor. After 18 years of naval service, he retired in 2006 and now consults for aviation safety projects. He joins us on Phenomena Radio to take us back to November 14th, 2004, to see through his own eyes and mind the UFO phenomenon that 6 months ago made the front page of the New York Times on December 16th, 2017, with the now historic headline, 2 Navy airmen and an object that accelerated like nothing I've ever seen.
You're listening to Phenomenon Radio Live exclusively on KGRA-DB, the Global Radio Alliance, with Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist and Earthfiles reporter and editor Linda Moulton Howe. The intrepid John Burroughs has the night off, and tonight's very special guest, Navy Commander David Fravor, will join the show right after this break.
Hi, this is Matt Ray for My Pillow. Look, I'd forgotten what a good night's sleep was like. Then I got a hold of My Pillow. I used to wake up with neck and shoulder pain. I thought it was the new normal. But after one night of using My Pillow, my neck and shoulder pain is gone, and I'm sleeping comfortably through the night. My Pillow's patented interlocking fill conforms to your personal sleep needs. It's guaranteed not to go flat. It's washable, it's dryable, and it's made in the USA, not to mention the 10-year warranty. Try it risk-free with a 60-day money-back guarantee. What have you got to lose besides back pain and shoulder pain? Right now, America's First News has a great deal. Try it for yourself. Call now. You'll get 50% off a 4-pack. That's 2 premium pillows and 2 travel pillows. Call now. 800-716-4835. Use the promo code RAY, R-A-Y. That's 800-716-4835. Use the promo code RAY.
Hi, it's AJ from Vibes, Mind, Body, Spirit. Have you been searching for unique items to create or add to your sacred space? What about tools for your holistic healing? Or those one-of-a-kind magical ingredients to manifest your desires? Well, look no more, because Vibes has a variety of items to assist you in your spiritual journey. From crystals to candles, incense to books, tapestries to jewelry, OnlineVibes.com has what you're seeking. We even have some thoughtful and mindful gifts to share with your friends and family too. Visit us at OnlineVibes.com from the comfort of your home, or give us a call at 385-244-1099 to have your order beautifully packaged and sent directly to you or a loved one. And right now, take advantage of the coupon code KGRA at checkout to receive 15% off any order. Remember, online, VIBEZ.com.
We are the contact for alternative research topics. The Planet, KGRAradio.com.
Listening to Phenomenon Radio Live exclusively on KGRAradio.com. Thank you all for joining us tonight. It's time to begin the interview for the first hour with Navy Commander David Fravor. Here's Linda Moulton Howe to begin tonight's interview. Linda?
Oh, Commander Fravor, I am so happy that you are with us on Phenomena Radio tonight, because it has been about 6 months since the big headlines in the New York Times and the Washington Post, and it seemed like for a couple of weeks that we had a big breakthrough about this mystery of unidentified aerial phenomena and military pilots that have interacted with them for decades, really, and that it was so refreshing to see the infrared video that you interacted with, known as the Tic Tac, and then to see that other shorter gimbal video. But it seems like it only took about 2 weeks, and then criticisms starting pouring in. And so I'm wondering if you can start tonight. I've had so many people emailing me and saying, Linda, we really are looking forward to Commander David Fravor telling in his own words in as many details as possible. So maybe you could start by going back to 9:30 a.m. on November 14th, 2004, what you were doing, where you were, why you were, and unfold everything.
Oh, Linda, thanks for having me on, and I can talk about that. I just want to say, this is all possible because former A6 brother Chuck Berry down in Houston, Texas, contacted you and set this up so that we could kind of make sure that the story was straight, because there's a lot of misinformation that's starting to come out through third and fourth party. So yes, I appreciate the opportunity to clear the air.
And I can thank Chuck Berry also. He is a loyal follower of Earthfiles.com, and I am so glad that he brought you to this, because as he said to me in the email, I really think that Commander David Fravor should be able to tell his story unedited and live. And so now here, let's go back and you start unfolding everything that happened.
Okay, so it's November 14th, 2004. We had been on board the ship for about 2 weeks. It was, we call them workups. So think of the battle group, which is the carrier strike group. So you got aircraft carrier, you've got cruisers, destroyers, you've got all the airplanes from the different squadrons that are now all on the aircraft carrier together. And we do what's called workups. So what we're doing is we're putting together the pieces, because we train as individual units prior to this. We're putting all the pieces together so that we can prepare for the 2005 deployment that we did to support Iraqi freedom.
Right.
So what's happening is we're going to work in small elements. So in this case, we were tasked to do an air defense exercise. So we're going to go out, and myself and my wingmen are going to be the blue air, or the good guys, and then 2 aircraft from the VMFA 232, the Marine Squadron, are going to be the bad guys. We call them the red air. So our cap, or our hold point for the blue air, is about 40 miles south of the aircraft carrier, and the Marines are going to go down about 100 miles. So we've got about 60 miles between the two sections.
And you're pretending that the Reds are going to be like a possible enemy in the Middle East when you get there, and these are the kinds of exercises you go through as good guys versus bad guys.
Yeah, we don't necessarily name a country at all. It's just they would do tactics from our adversaries or from other countries that, we have observed or we've seen in training with them. And we're going to be the good guys, and we're going to use our standard U.S. tactics and defend. And at the same time, we're working with the controllers on board the cruiser, because they're the actual air defense commanders for the battle group. And they're going to control us. So they're going to tell us where they're at. They're going to tell us, the pictures that they're seeing. And then we're going to go ahead and consummate the intercept with, until we can get contact with our radars, we rely on the ship's radars to kind of paint that picture for us, so we know where we're going, we know where they're at. So that's the setup. So as we launch, my wingman, I'm flying F-18Fs. They're brand new jets, literally right out of the factory. We had just received them from Boeing. It was the first deployment for the Lot 26 Advanced Crew Station Super Hornets, which means the back seat can be completely decoupled from the front seat, which is significant. So we get out, we're joining up, we start down to proceed to our cap. The Marine airplanes had gotten off earlier, and the cruiser had started to see these objects. And they started to vector one of the Marine airplanes with the CO squadron. We call them Cheeks. And the F-18Cs, which are the older F-18s, the smaller ones, don't have as much gas. So based on that account, they said, well, just go ahead and press down to your hold point, and we'll get the Black Aces to do it, which is the Super Hornets. So we have significantly more fuel. So as we checked in with the cruiser, the controller came up and he said, hey, Fast Eagle, which was our call sign that day. He said, Fast Eagle, what ordnance do you have on board? And I chuckled, because we don't fly with live ordnance in training for obvious reasons. So what we did have on board is, we call it a CATM 9, which is a captive carry A9. So it's a real seeker head, but the body of the missile, the 5-foot tube, well, it's almost 6-foot tube, doesn't have a warhead or a motor or anything in it, and it's painted blue, which tells you that it's inert. So it gives everything's real, except it will never leave the airplane unless you take it off or you hit it with a sledgehammer. It's just right. It's not coming off the airplane.
And Commander,
he said, go ahead.
Let me just clarify here for a moment for the audience, because this is so important. The CAP, all CAP point, comes up even in the executive summary that George Knapp released in last month on May 18th, that what's happening is that you have a fighter mission, and you're going to go out and shoot down enemy aircraft within a certain patrol area in terms of the exercise, and that this certain patrol area, that's the CAP point that you reference, and that's in so much of this printed material, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And so that's really important to where you're headed and where you have these latitude and longitude coordinates.
Yeah, we're going to get to it, but they don't pass latitude, longitude. But here's what happens. So as we press out towards our we call it, we'll call it the hold point because it's easier to explain, or you can call it the CAP, which is a combat air patrol. So it would be a place where we would hold until the ship saw some type of threat aircraft, and then we would get vectored onto it. So, which is really what's going to happen right now. So as we approach the CAP, they tell us, we tell them what ordnance we have on board, which is just training CATM. And they say, hey, we're gonna suspend the training exercise, which was the air defense exercise. We have a real world tasking. And I said, okay. So they said they sent us out to the west, and they immediately start giving us what we call BRA calls, or bearing, range, and altitude. So they tell us, and this is not exact, but they send us out to the west. So 270 at 60, for 60 miles at 20,000 feet. So it means he's west of our position. He's about 60 miles away, roughly, and he's at 20,000 feet. We don't know what it is. All they're seeing is a blip on their radar. So we start moving out to the west, and they're talking to us. So we're telling them that we don't see anything, and we've got our radar set up. So we're scanning a significant piece of the sky, both left, right, and up and down between the two airplanes. And my wingman is on my left side, or in this case, positioned to the south as we proceed to the west. So as we get down, they're telling us, 270 at, 40 miles, 270 at 20 miles. We're still not seeing anything on the radar, or we're saying picture clean rest. We have nothing. And as we get out to the same point where our blip and their blip merge, that's called merge plot, which means we're basically in the resolution cell of the radar. So radars have a range and an azimuth resolution, and it varies on the system. But we're in that same area. So to the pilots and the weapon systems operators that are in the back seat, it tells us, hey, get your heads out, because now we have to find this thing. It's in the same piece of sky. It's somewhere around us. So as we start looking around, we're looking out the right-hand side. So my wingman, again, is on the left-hand side. He's stepped up, and we're both looking down to the right-hand side. And Jim, who's in the back seat of my wingman, says, hey, Skipper, do you? And he gets about that much sentence out, and I'm like, what is that? And at first we're looking at the disturbance, which is really what clues our eyes onto where the Tic Tac is at. So we see this, what looks like a seamound under the water, and if you've ever been at sea, for any of the listeners, if you put something about 10 feet below the water in the ocean, and as the waves come up, they'll break over the top of it, and you'll get white water. I guess the best part of the day is that it was, as you said in the beginning, is it was crystal clear. There was light winds, so there was no white caps, which quite often out off the coast of San Diego, you get some pretty decent white caps. There's no clouds. It's literally a perfect day. I always used to tell people, if you had a sailboat, it was a perfect day to be on a sailboat.
Yeah.
So we noticed this disturbance, this white water, where the waves are breaking, and we're looking at it, and all of a sudden we see this little white object. So I want you to in your mind, imagine we're going to use a clock now. So the object is at the middle of the clock, and we're at the 6 o'clock position.
Mm-hmm.
My wingman is just to the south of me. And we're watching the Tic Tac, and it's over this white disturbance in the water, and it's pointed north-south, so it's elongated north-south, and it's going north-south, east-west, north-south. It's just kind of moving around randomly. And what's interesting when we first see it is the first time you see it, because it's down low over the water, so it's about 50 feet, you think, oh, helicopter. Well, helicopters have a rotor wash. They have, if you've been around enough and you see them, and we see them all the time when we're out on the aircraft carrier, it's definitely not a helicopter. The other thing that's unique is if a helicopter is just transiting, if it's pointing in one direction, it's just kind of going left and right. As it goes to one side, it actually has to slow down, it has to stop, and it has to come back the other way. It has to overcome the inertia and the weight of that moving in one direction. This isn't doing that. It's almost like a ping pong ball. So when it goes right, it can stop instantly. It goes back left. It can go straight forward. It can go back. It's just kind of randomly kind of moving around. It's very erratic.
And sir,
as we're watching, go ahead.
At this point, have you gone from 20,000 feet down to about 12,000 feet to get a clear view?
Not yet. Not yet. We're still at 20,000 feet.
Okay.
So as we're watching this erratic, trying to figure out what it is as we're looking at it, we're still at about 20,000 feet. We get to about the 9 o'clock position. So I think we're just going around the circle. At about the 9 o'clock position, I'm like, I'm going to go check this thing out. So I tell my backseater, I say, hey, we're going down. And I get on the radio. I say, hey, we're going to check it out. And the other airplane decides, hey, we're going to stay up high, which is a good idea because now they're going to separate from us. They're still in visual sight. So they can see us and the object. So at about the 9 o'clock position, I start to descend, and as we get around the corner and I get to about the 12 o'clock position, keep in mind the object is still kind of pointed north-south, it turns, and now it parallels us. So it turns and it kind of points east-west because we're at 12 o'clock kind of pointing east. It turns and it's kind of pointing west, and it starts coming up. So now it's mirroring us. So now you think, all right, well, it knows we're here. So it starts to mirror us, and we start our descent. So we come, as we started at 9, we're at about 12, and we start coming down, and it's coming up. So we get all the way around the circle, and we get back to about I'm at the 8 o'clock position, and the object is now at about the 2 o'clock position, and my wingman is up above. And I decide, well, we can go around all day long. Nothing's going to happen. I want to get close to it. So I cut across the circle. So I basically go from 8 o'clock, and I'm actually going to cut across and go to 3 o'clock because at the rate we're moving, if the object is at 2 o'clock and it maintains its normal velocity, it's going to get to 3 o'clock about the time I start pointing at 3 o'clock. And that way I can join on it and see what it actually is. So it's about, at the time I make the move, it's probably, 3,000, 2,500 feet below me. And I cut across from the 8 o'clock and I go towards the 3 o'clock position. And as I'm pulling nose onto the object, I get within about a half mile of it. And it goes in a climb from left to right across my nose. And as soon as it crosses my nose, it rapidly accelerates and disappears.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked the wingman because I'm like, well, where'd it go? Because, it just literally disappeared. My wingmen, they don't see it at all. They're like, it's gone. We're like, well, that was very odd. Now, to put it in perspective, if I was sitting still, and if anyone's been to an air show and you watch like the Blue Angels come by and they do their super fast pass, which is subsonic, you can see them for quite a while. If something came by at Mach 2, you can still see that for quite a time. You're going to be able to see it. What it does is we call them, they look like dots because they get smaller and smaller and smaller until eventually you just can't see them anymore. So the object disappears. So we're kind of a little bit, baffled to try and figure out what it is. So I decide, immediately, because it disappears and no one sees it, I said, well, let's just turn around and see what was in the water. So as soon as we turn around, now keep in mind, we're pretty much right over the spot where the disturbance was. We just haven't been watching it. As we turn around, there's nothing. There's no white water to be seen as far as the eye can show. So I'm like, well, that's kind of weird. So we turn again. We're going to decide, hey, let's at least get some training out of this because, time is money. So we decide, hey, we're going to go back to our cat point. We'll still be able to at least get 1 or 2 runs for training for the cruiser and us. So as soon as we turn, the controller comes up and he says, hey, sir, you are not going to believe this, but that thing, as you referred to it, is at your cat point. It's at the hold point.
Which is what?
So I'm like,
This is where you were now going to go, the cap point.
Yes, that's exactly right. So there's a couple things you need to ask. One, the cap point is somewhere around, estimating 60 miles away, okay? And the whole time that's elapsed is maybe a couple of minutes for us to turn those jets around and do what we did, and this thing appears 60 miles away. So, you can do the math, but that's let's just say that's really fast. It's faster than we can go.
And Commander, it must have felt eerie that what had just disappeared and the water has gone quiet now is exactly at the cap point that you were just going to go to, but now the object is there.
That is 100% correct. As a matter of fact, I remember telling my backseater, I said, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty weirded out, mostly because at this point, I had been flying for 16 years, had, 3,500-ish hours, a lot of experience, and never, ever seen anything like this. So we're like, okay, so we go back to we start proceeding to our cap point. We put our radars out there thinking, all right, we're going to see this thing again. And we never see it again. We never see it on our radar. We don't know where it goes. The cruiser loses contact with it. And we don't think much of it, and we finish our training, and we proceed back to the ship. So when we got back to the ship, we have to do a debrief. So usually the junior crew members go down to what we call Civic or Carrier Intelligence, CVIC, and they go do a debrief. So of course they have to go down there, and the ridicule is coming because these things don't happen very often. And we knew this was going to happen. I said, basically, we're going to catch a lot of grief when we get back. Not necessarily in those words, but you can imagine. So they went down and they gave the debrief, which, of course, people are chuckling like we're probably crazy. And we went into what's called our PR shop, which is where we store all of our flight gear. And we were taking it off, and the next crew from my squadron was getting ready to launch. And we're telling them about this while they're putting their gear on. So the Wizzo in that airplane decides that he's going to find this thing, and if that's his mission for his flight, he's going to try and find this thing, and he's going to get a video of it, which ironically he does. He launches off. The pilot has the autopilot on, and they're driving out to a hold point, and he picks up a radar hit on his radar. He tries to lock it, and as soon as he tries to lock it, the radar gets jammed. So he's unable to hold a radar lock, but instinctively thinking, you can switch to the targeting pod, which is a passive sensor, and that's the IR video that you see. He immediately selects the targeting pod, and he obtains a passive track on the object, which is the video that you see. So he tapes it, and now keep in mind that, and this is for all the people that want to try and debug stuff, the videos that you're seeing on YouTube have been copied multiple times. So they are not of the best quality from what we had, and we're looking at it on a 21-inch monitor. So a nice, clear picture on a 21-inch monitor is significantly different than little things that you get on YouTube where you expand your screen on your computer.
Right.
So he takes that's the video that you talked about. He switches through all the different modes. If you really want to get a kind of a breakdown of what you're looking at, the To the Stars Academy of Science that set it up by Tom DeLong has broke down the video, and they actually have some captions that tell you what you're looking at, and it'll say this is this mode, this is IR, this is EO. Right. And they do a really nice job. I sat with them to make sure that and told them basically here's what you're looking at and here's the indicators of what's going on, so that at least the video makes sense. Otherwise, you're just looking at something sitting in, and it changes from a black background to a lighter background to a black background. It goes back and forth, and then the object zings off the side.
And that change, that change in the black and white is the difference between hot FLIR and cold FLIR?
No, it's actually the difference between the FLIR, which is the forward-looking infrared receiver. So think of it as if you're using a black and white TV camera, the black and white that you see is differences in color. For a FLIR, the different colors that you see, the different shades of gray between black and white, and then all the shades of gray in between, are actually differences in temperature. So you're actually not seeing any color at all. You're looking at the infrared waveform that's coming in. So it's more heat-based, but it just looks like black and white, but it's not. When it goes to more of a gray screen and the object in the middle is kind of that darker gray / kind of blackish, that's the EOIR mode. That's the visual light form that you would do. It's a TV camera. As we call EO, electro-optical, which is a pod.
And from what was videotaped in the silent 2 minute and 45 second, at the end, it was in a white mode when it just suddenly goes so fast right off of the screen.
That's correct. Yeah, he goes through, there's different varying zoom modes. Just the easiest way is there's basically a wide angle, a mid, and a close. They're not the same for either one. The TV actually gets you a little bit closer. The pods that we were using were brand new advanced targeting pods made by Raytheon that were specifically built to put on the Super Hornet. They kind of align to our system. So it's, we could talk about this as the show goes on, but there's a lot of internet experts that think they understand how these things work, but most of them have probably never operated one. And it's important to put out that there was nothing wrong. The pods were totally fine. They were, for the most part, brand new.
Right.
And they worked exactly as advertised.
And let's address what the criticism has been, but could you first explain, when it's white at the end with that object that goes off so fast, what temperature would that have been, and how fast have you guys estimated that went off the screen?
I've never done the math, because the hardest problem is you'd have to determine the range between the airplane and the object. If you watch the video at the very end on the right corner, it says range 99.9. 99.9 means that the radar, which is going to provide the range, cannot get ranging information on the target. Okay, so there's no range information. I will tell you that, as fast as it went off, to accelerate from basically holding and then going off the left side is pretty impressive. It broke the 2 bars. When you see the video, there's a vertical bars and one on each side of it. That's just a passive track on how it's holding block on the object. For it to leave like that, that's a significant acceleration rate to just go off the screen that fast.
Right.
But could I make an estimate? No, it's not what you're seeing at the end where it's the white screen with the black object. That's not heat rated. That's the black and white TV mode.
Okay.
Is what it's in. It's in the EO mode of the EOIR pod. Being infrared.
What did they conclude, though, was the temperature of this object on the video?
To my knowledge, there's been no assessment on the temperature of the object. It's just we had it set up as white hot. So if it's white, it's hotter than the background.
Okay.
Which is the case. You can see it when it goes, when the background is black and there's that bright white object in the middle. That means the object is hotter than the surroundings. And when it's that bright, it's significantly hotter than the surroundings. But pretty much on a bright sunny day, airplanes will look the same way. They'll be a bright white, because the skin heats up from the air friction.
Right. And for our audience, I think it would be important for you to address what has been some of the criticisms. I know metabunk.org, that they were trying to say that what was in both of the videos was essentially like one of ours that was misinterpreted. Can you explain to an audience why what was on the video and what you guys were dealing with was not another plane?
Well, yeah, that's pretty easy. Planes have wings. If you looked at it on an IR, a plane will usually have a plume on one side where the exhaust is coming out. Planes have control surfaces. This had no control surfaces. It had no known visible propulsion mode. On the IR, it had no heat. It was a uniform color throughout. When you get to the end of the video, you can kind of see it on the YouTube video. When we had the original stuff, you could see it quite well. Right before it flies off the screen, he's getting relatively close to it. you can see there's two small objects that look like, think of a little like a letter L, like little feet sticking out the bottom, like a little landing gear or antenna or something coming out of the bottom. So it came down and then just went both in the same direction, sticking out. But there's nothing on the top. There's nothing, you don't see anything, and then it just accelerates. So, I don't know. I don't know of anything, to my knowledge, I know of nothing that has an acceleration rate like that. I mean, if you think about it, everyone has watched pictures of the space shuttle or the SpaceX flights going up. You watch those for a while, and they've got a pretty high acceleration rate to get themselves into orbit. And we're happy that, that SpaceX can land a rocket engine and recover it on a pad, which were mostly successful, but not 100%. And now you've got an object that we tracked back in 2004 that could come from above 80,000 feet. It was tracked by one of the most sophisticated radars, in the world. It comes down, it hangs out at 20,000 feet for 3 or 4 hours, and then it just goes back up and disappears. And there was more than one of them. They were tracking multiple objects. Our incident happened because it was the first time that they had manned airplanes airborne when the object showed up. And I don't know if it's lucky or unlucky that we happened to be the flight that actually went out to see this thing.
And Commander, since this had been going on for at least 2 weeks before the November 14th incident that you were there, that this was being reported up whatever chain of command there was about these other unidentifieds for 2 weeks playing cat and mouse. And I know that when George Knapp last month reported on Channel 8 in Las Vegas, the executive summary that was released by To the Stars, it has on the near end page a description that on November following the intercept of the AAV, Commander Fravor reported to CVIC to debrief with intelligence. He discussed the entire mission and AAV contact with LCDR, the Carrier Air Wing Intelligence Officer. And this goes on for a paragraph or two, basically implying and saying words like, he reported to the commander of the Air Wing, Captain Blank out, also a highly experienced aviator, but he did not take it very seriously. Why would there, what has happened in the conditioning of between military DOD and pilots like you who are so experienced and trained that you said you were afraid of being criticized or that there would be sarcasm for reporting essentially an object that was defying any known aircraft on the planet? Why are we in such a knee-jerk reaction?
Well, I want to clarify a couple things. One, I don't think any of us were ever afraid to report it, and I never. I won't speak for the other three, but being that they all work for me, there's no fear of retribution for seeing it. I guess it's good when you're hanging out with the boss and you chase this thing. But it was just, we know that when things happen, carrier aviation, it's almost like a giant family when you're out on a ship. And we all become friends, and we all kind of, I guess if you have a weakness, if it gets out, then everyone's going to let you know about it. And one of two things are going to happen: you're going to cry a lot, or you're just going to get over it. So I would say it's not the most politically correct, but it's the way we get over things, and it's the camaraderie that we build. So that when you come back and say, "Hey, I chased a UFO," that your friends are going to give you a little bit of grief. For example. When we came back and the joke started and the word got out, because something like this happens on a ship with over 5,000 people, it's going to spread pretty fast. And the entire crew is going to know about it, that it happened. So it did. It went out. We have Ships TV. There's usually 2 channels that play movies. They do about a 12-hour run, and then they repeat because the typical workday is 12 on, 12 off, 24/7. And those young men and women do that every single day, even on holidays, and they're out there right now doing it as we talk on the radio. So that's important to remember. So the movies that they played were, of course, Men in Black, Signs, Aliens, the Independence Day, those are the movies that run. We have an airplan schedule that comes out every day, and it's literally the air wing schedule. On one side shows all the squadrons and what cycle you're flying or what times, and on the back is all the notes. And there's always a comic. Usually someone does something stupid or there's something funny going on, and they'll take like a Far Side, or they have books of all these comics, and they'll put it on there, and they'll change the caption a little bit because it's just funny. So there was two of them. The first day was Far Side, and the second day was Men in Black, and it had me and my Wizzo on there, and it said, defending, Earth against aliens. So it was kind of funny stuff. But it was, the other side is that there was a lot of people that were extremely interested in it. That would come up, like I would sit down to eat in the wardroom, and some of the other air crew would be like, "Hey, Skipper, can I sit here?" And I'd be like, "Of course, yeah." And then they'd be like, "Can we talk about that?" Because they were fascinated about what it was.
Right.
But honestly, after about 3 days, it kind of died down, because you think about it, we're in the middle of workups, we're training. My air crew that were with me had to train, and some of them were relatively junior. And myself and my XO had a squadron to run, and the ship had to run. So I didn't worry about someone not coming out, and I figured maybe someone would, because it was such a rare event. But for some reason, and I can't speak for the few folks that were above me, why that never went out or why it just died. Sometimes if you don't understand what it is and you don't know how to actually deal with it, you just ignore it and hope it goes away. And in this case, it did die down until about 2009.
Well, on March 14th, 2015, your friend Paco Chiarici, he wrote for FighterSweep.com an article, There I Was, the X-Files edition, about hearing from you what we're talking about tonight. And I am extremely interested in one of his paragraphs that says, quote, all through these maneuvers, Dave, referencing you, Dave's WSO, which is your weapons
systems operator.
That's right. Yeah. And that was Jim Slate in your
No,
experience.
Jim was in the other jet.
Yeah. But wasn't he your WSO or no?
He was in the other jet. My Wizzo, he's not he's not talking right now. I mean, I know where he's at. He will talk. There's a couple of air crew in this whole event that are not going public. They'll talk to certain people, but some of them are still active duty, and just they don't want to be in the media.
Okay. All right. Yes. All right. Well, I'm now quoting from Paco's article, and to realize this is 2015, this goes back to March of 2015, and we didn't hear about this in a big public way until December 16th, 2017. But here's a quote from his article. Quote, all through these maneuvers, Dave's WSO was broadcasting the real-time events of the intercept to Princeton. The radar operators in the E2 listened on the secure net to what sounded like one of the hundreds of intercepts they had heard over the years, with the notable exception that the air crew's voices were more stressed and the verbiage to ID the target as unlike anything they had heard before, close quote. And I'm assuming Paco is writing this from having talked to you. So can you expand about what was, it says the radar operators that they are listening to you broadcasting real-time events. Is that audio?
Yeah, so that's actually, hats off to Paco. It's Paco. When I say people are very interested, I want to hit on this real quick, but Paco and I have a friend, we'll call him Matt. I had told Matt this story. Matt used to fly with me. And so Matt and I and Paco and Chuck Berry were all on the USS Ranger together, and we were in sister squadrons. So we were in one squadron, my friend Matt and I, and Paco and Chuck were in the other squadron. But we all, like I said, we're like a family. And there's many of us that are still in contact today. So Paco really was really fascinated with the story, and he would call me up. Matter of fact, he called me up one day, and I returned his call, and he said, "I'm putting you on speakerphone." I said, "Why?" He says, "Well, I'm having a dinner party, and I want you to explain the UFO to Tic Tac." So I literally gave what I'm doing to you right now, I did to him at a dinner party. And then he asked me, because he had the fighter suite block, he said, hey, he called me by my call sign, but we'll just say, hey, he said, "Hey, Dave, can I write a blog on this?" I said, I probably said no about 10 times, because I'm like, I don't want this. And he finally, I said, because he was very, very persistent, I said, okay, you can write it. So he wrote the blog, which prompted a little bit of attention, but not much. As a matter of fact, as I've told you, I've talked to Jeremy Corbell, who he's the one guy that when Paco said, "Hey, I got this guy that's interested, will you talk to him?" I said, "All right, I'll talk to him." For the most part, everyone else I've said no to. And I probably only talked to, including you, there's less than 20 people that I've actually been open and allowed to do like a media talk. And the first big one was the New York Times with Helene Cooper.
And the video, you know how controversial it has become about the fact that the Navy and DOD within a week said that they had not officially released the videos, but Luis Elizondo has said that he had the official ability to release the videos and did. What do you understand is the relationship in all of this since 2004, the chain of custody on the videos? Where have they been, and what has happened, and why has it become so controversial about whether or not the Pentagon has sort of stepped aside from confirming that Luis Elizondo was the director of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program in the Pentagon?
I can't speak for DOD. I can tell you the video. So when we came back, when actually the airplane that took the video came back from their flight, the backseater went in to debrief, and of course, when he walks in, there's one of the petty officers is sitting there, one of the intel specialists, and goes, "Oh, VFA-41, did you see any aliens?" And he kind of laughed, and he said, "Yeah, as a matter of fact, they're on these tapes," and he threw the tapes down. So what happens with those tapes is the targeting pod video that you've seen, they copy it off of the tape that we have. It's a high 8 tape that comes directly off the video feed to our displays, so it's really not corrupted at all. And they load it onto it's a giant machine, but it's a classified hard drive. So the video was, at the time when it was taken, was actually classified. And about 2000 I had just retired, so it was about, well, no, it was a little after that. So it was about 2007, 2008. My Wizzo had sent me an email and said, "Hey, Skipper, does this look familiar?" And it was actually the video that you have all seen now. And someone who had taken it off of the drive and did that. What we did with the tapes is, besides the intelligence guys trying to play a joke with us like there was going to be this big investigation, and when I figured out it wasn't, we had a little talk. I took the tapes back to our ready room and I copied them, because we have to reuse those tapes. So I had 2 new tapes, and I copied the video onto them, and I wrapped them up, and I put them in the safe with a note on them. When I turned over, they were still in the safe, and I talked to the guy who took over from me. He said they were in there when he turned over, but because we're moving so much, someone probably got them, didn't know what was on them, and just rewound them, put new stickers on them, and used them, because they're consumables for us. So we use what we can because we have limited funds. And those tapes probably got taped over. I also know that the cruiser, they archived their radar tapes. Those, no one knows where those are at. So, and I don't want to start saying, "Oh, it's a cover-up. Someone came and got them." I think the tapes got used. I think people over time don't realize that the event happened, and they go, "How long do we need to keep these?" Just like, you keep your tax returns for 5 years, and after that point, you can get rid of them, because when you're moving around and you're deploying back and forth, carrying a bunch of excess stuff is not fun. So that's the best that I can tell you about the tapes. As far as Lou's position and at the Pentagon, I know he was at the Pentagon because I talked to him when he was there right before he retired. He did work I know he did work for DOD, and that was his role. He was the ATIP guy. But as far as DOD not acknowledging, I would say, I don't know if it's really that case. I think, there was a conscious decision to say, hey, we're going to allow this stuff to come out. I think a lot of that credit goes to Tom DeLonge, who, through his notoriety and of being, obviously with like 182 and others, he, his fascination with this allowed significant people in government circles that he got to meet to start to pay more attention. And then actually that's what prompted a lot of this to come out. I think Lou was a little bit frustrated with the reaction of how people were taking it. Was, that it wasn't quite 100%, there was like there's always that kind of chuckle when there's enough information out there that these things are credible. Where they come from, I don't know. I have in my own mind that, I don't know if we would have developed that, because I think it's an incredible leap in technology. And if you have that incredible leap in technology, I think eventually it would come out, because it would be a huge advancement for mankind as a whole, if not just for our own personal defense, but just, an energy source that has the ability to propel itself up, down, left, right, control itself at will, would be significant. And if it's a clean energy source, then it takes a lot of the fossil fuel, and you start to change the game on how we live our lives. A huge, huge leap.
And Commander, there are the issues of the sudden invisibility and, well, let's just say implication of some sort of telepathic knowledge. And right now I'm looking at this is from Paco's article as well, and it seems like a very important paragraph, and it's why I use the words latitude and longitude before. He said that that the WSO first picked up on a contact on the radar around 30 nautical miles away while it was operating in the RWS scan mode. He checked the coordinates, and it was indeed, talking about the UFO, hovering at their precise cap point. He attempted several SST locks to no avail. Later in the debrief, he explained that he had multiple telltale cues, and it says that they were tying into that subsequent, the next 4 crews. This is now, you guys have finished your exercise. Now, it says back on the Nimitz after recovery, the 4 crew headed down to the Paraloft to remove their gear. And the next 4 crew from VFA 41 were getting dressed for their training mission to the same area using the same assigned latitude, longitudes as cap points. Dave and his crew members passed on what they had seen to the new guys and reminded them to get the tape. So now, did the subsequent pilots, did they try to go to that same latitude, longitude cap point just to see if it would show up there?
Yeah, well, you can see it. Yeah, that's actually where they found it. It was hanging out at the cap point. And you can tell, we don't pull up a lat long the way it works, but you can display the waypoint, so where it's at. So if the object's sitting over the waypoint, you assume that, hey, he's at the cap point, because that's what it looks like. The STT is a single target track, which allows the radar. Obviously, things have changed in the last 10 years on the way radar operates, because we have the new ones have even a better radar in them. But he does, and that's where he ends up castling to the targeting fluid, because it won't lock up. He ends up getting, because I've watched the tape a gazillion times, he ends up getting a bunch of jam indications. The radar starts to sense that it's being jammed based on what's being sent back. And it gives you indications to tell you, hey, I'm being jammed. And as soon as he saw those indications, that's when he castled to the targeting flare and took the video that you've all seen.
Okay, and so that jam is coming from the UFO.
Yeah, Yeah, it is.
And so that
If
is
you look at it, yeah.
That is an active interaction between the UFO and the pilot. And then it's now clear tonight you were not running a camera in your plane. It was the next crew that followed up and went to that same latitude, longitude cap point.
That's correct. We had cameras. We had them on, but obviously, we never saw it. And my one regret out of the entire thing is that we fly, the front seaters in the airplanes we kept what's called the joint helmet mounted cueing system. So it maps. It's got sensors in the cockpit that it tracks through magnetics. It tracks the magnetic field, and then all the sensors are slewed to your head. So if I want the radar and the targeting sphere to be hooked to my head, I can move a few switches and turn my head to the right, and it'll all go to the right, and I can turn to the left, and it'll all go to the left. Well, that system actually has a camera in it that will tape, and my one regret is because you probably would have got some really cool video because I was staring at this thing for 5 minutes. But we typically don't turn it on because when we start moving our head around, like when I said merge plot, and we're looking out both sides of the airplane trying to find stuff, it gets extremely nauseating. And what we would much rather have is we would tape the targeting pod, we have two displays that we tape in the cockpit, the left and the right. And usually we're taping those two because that's where the radar's at, and that's where we pull out our learning. So anytime we do a hop like that, because it's training, we have to come back and debrief it, and we want to make sure, and everything is scrutinized, and every single hop that you fly is scrutinized, and every landing is scrutinized, because we're trying to get better and better and better. So we're looking for things that we did well, and we're looking for things that we need to improve on. We're looking for mistakes that we made so that we can point these out to each other. And then the next flight, we try and work on them, because what we're trying to do is, is there ever a perfect flight? I would say probably not, but we're always trying to strive for the perfect flight. And if you're always trying, 98% is pretty good when you're flying in aviation. So, and that's what we're trying to get to, that almost flawless execution.
And those of us who are not jet pilots, we are the ones who defer to you for your intelligence, your honesty, and listening to this first hour on Phenomenon Radio. I want to thank you for being a reality check on how extraordinary what you were interacting with and other crews were. And when we come back after this commercial break, what I'd like to do is to go into the criticisms of places like the Black Vault and the Metabunk, and have you help us understand what happened on November 14th, 2004 was so extraordinary that it defies explanation. Thanks, Race. President Donald Trump on June 18th, 2018, ordered the Pentagon to establish a new Space Force military branch that will be separate but equal, he says. General Dunford said he would handle it, but neither the general nor the president acknowledged that the creation of a new military branch demands an act of Congress. Pushing back against the president's request was U.S. Senator Bill Nelson, Democrat from Florida, and a former astronaut. He twittered, quote, "The president told a U.S. general to create a new Space Force as the sixth branch of military today, which generals tell me they don't want. Thankfully, the president can't do it without Congress, because now is not the time to rip the Air Force apart. Too many important missions at stake," close quote. And this is not Trump's first request to DOD for a new Space Force. Back on March 13th, 2018, he was speaking to members of the Marine Corps Air Station Miramar in San Diego, California. He said, quote, "Very soon we're going to Mars. You wouldn't have been going to Mars if my opponent won, that I can tell you," referring to Hillary Clinton. "You wouldn't even be thinking about it. My new national strategy for space recognizes that space is a war-fighting domain, just like the land, air, and sea. We have the Air Force. We'll have the Space Force. You have the Army, the Navy, That could happen. That could be the big breaking story. From the very beginning, many of our astronauts have been soldiers and sailors, airmen, Coast Guardsmen, and Marines. Our service members will be vital to ensuring America continues to lead the way into the stars, lead the way into space. We're way, way behind, and we're catching up fast, so fast that nobody even believes it, close quote. But the reality check is that it could take 2 years for Congress to act on Trump's request. Currently, the House already has a different proposal for a fiscal 2019 National Defense Authorization Act to create a U.S. Space Command as a subordinate combat branch under U.S. Strategic Command. No one knows if even this plan will end up in the final authorization bill. This is Linda Moulton Howe. Please stay tuned to Earthfiles news updates on KGRA Radio and visit every day my science, environment, and real X-Files news website, earthfiles.com, for more on breaking stories about our universe, this solar system, and the planet we live on.
And that's the news, and it's brought to you by Earthfiles.com. Now back to the interview with Navy Commander David Fravor. Once again, here's Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Race. And Commander Fravor, before the break, you were confirming that there was a jamming by the UFO at the point that you were aimed right at it. And we were talking that jamming is an act of war in terms of terrestrial military dynamics. And so I wonder if that is why there is this strange confusion about the name of the Pentagon office that Luis Elizondo directed. In the New York Times article on December 16th, 2017, it clearly states Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. But within 2 or 3 days, there were others, and I think even that day, Politico and the Washington Post, they had Advanced Aviation. Do you have any insight about this confusion? This was one of the first criticisms, that there was not consistency on the name of the Pentagon program, and would threat relate to the facts of things like a UFO jamming you?
No, I don't think it had anything to do with the name. And I think anything that we don't know is a threat until we figure out what it is. Think if you're out in the woods, and there's obviously going to be people that'll disagree with me here, but that's okay. If you're out in the woods and you're just hiking and you see something, you don't know what it is, if it's a deer, a rabbit, or whatever, but as you hear and see things, you immediately kind of get into a little posture of what was that, because you want to figure out what it is. You want to identify it to go, is it a threat to me or is it not? But until most people will assume that it's a threat. If you look at, animals do the same thing. If you're walking, like I walk my dog, and the dog, if we're just hanging out, if you see a rabbit and the rabbit hears a noise, you see the little white tail come up, which is a warning, and the rabbit's probably going to go run and hide, or it's going to freeze. Deer do the same thing. I think people do the same thing. We judge first of, can this hurt me or not, and then we move on. Well, if you're looking at an unidentified object like this, or something that you don't know, the initial thing is it's a threat. And I think that's an important lead-in to say, because I've been asked, what was it doing? Why was it there? Why do these things keep showing up? Why are they coming down and hanging out for a few hours and then going back up to wherever they went? And I asked the question, okay, so let's just assume we don't know where it's from. We know it's not one of ours. There was no markings on it. I think if this would have had a marking from another country and it had that capability, we probably would have addressed it entirely different, because then it definitely would have been a threat. And you can think of threat countries out there, but if it just came from country X that was one of our adversaries, if you think Cold War and it came out of the former Soviet Union, you would go, and, it had a hammer and sickle on it, we had probably just went high order, and the whole world would have been out talking to us. But in this case, it didn't have any markings. It was just white. And, because we didn't know what to do, but I will ask again, what was it doing? Was it friendly? What's its intentions? Was it observing? Was it communicating with something? Is there more objects that, something that could go like a transmedium that could go in the air and then actually submerge itself underwater? I don't know. I'm speculating, but if you think of the shape, a Tic Tac is kind of like a submarine. So obviously, if it went slow enough, it could obviously penetrate. If it had a propulsion system, and it was sealed off, it could do all kinds of things. So it's not beyond the realm of possibilities.
Well, did you ever have a briefing with anybody on this whole issue of the jamming being a threat?
No. Let's jump into some of the things. So there's all kinds of different stories out there of, I actually had a really good friend of mine on the ship who flew with me, and this was our second or third deployment together. And he actually contacted me when the article hit, and he says, Dave, I always thought that you guys had to sign a non-disclosure to not release this, that you guys were debriefed. I said, we were never debriefed. Let's just, for the record, we were never told to not talk. We were never debriefed. People in suits didn't show up on the boat. If you talk to people that, my friends, like Paco has known about this for a long time. My friend Matt has known about this. This has been out there. And it was always a great thing when you're sitting around with your buds, maybe having a beer, and they go, hey, what's the coolest thing you ever saw flying? And I go, well, I chased a UFO. And they kind of look at you like, what? And then when you give the story and you say, look, there was 4 people that saw this, then there's a little bit of a fascination that goes, wow, that's rather interesting. It had to be, what'd you think? And I said, I told people, my XO at the time asked me, what do you think it was? I said, I don't know. I said, I have no idea. I said, it was impressive. The way it flew, the way it maneuvered, the way it could accelerate. And my response to him was, I don't know, but I would like to fly it, because it was that cool. So,
right. And you never were asked to sign an NDA?
No, I was never asked to sign an NDA. No one ever came out to the ship. No one from, some special government agency wearing black suits and thin black ties and sunglasses. I didn't get an IRA to make my mind go blank. I had no one, none of the actually 6 of us that were interacted in one way or another with this, and especially the 4 of us that saw it visually, and myself and my Wizzo got relatively close to it. We did not have physiological episodes. We did not forget where we were at. We didn't have memory loss. It was just, if anything, it was just an encounter in your life that you'll probably never forget. And until the New York Times article hit, like I said, it was a great story over beers. And to tell you how secret it was, a good friend of mine that I used to work with, who lives out west, was on safari in Tanzania, and he sent me a text because the New York Times article hit. He's like, dude, I'm in Tanzania on a safari and your face is all over my cell phone. He goes, I remember you telling me that story while we were drinking wine. So that's about how much of a secret it was. And that's it. And I would like to say also, because I know there's been some other stories that people showed up on the ship and, these are firsthand accounts. Well, when you get on an aircraft carrier, there was the admiral and his staff, and you got the captain of the ship and the XO. You got the air wing commander, and then right below all those guys are the squadron COs. So you're talking a handful of guys, and then the squadron COs were all the squadrons, and I was one of them. So I was one of the senior guys. Out of the 5,500 people on the boat, ranked, for responsibility and everything, I was probably in the top 20. Okay? So I would think that since it was my squadron and it was me and we chased it, that if someone was going to come out and do some special investigation, that there's rumors that it happened, that I would probably be one of the first ones that were talked to. Okay?
Right.
And that never ever happened. Nothing ever happened until I call it the unofficial official report that George Knapp released was done, and that was about 2009.
On this same event? before.
Yeah, that's the one, the report that you quoted that George Knapp released, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
Roughly?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's when I call it the unofficial official report. It was actually an unofficial report. It was not done if for those requests, it just didn't exist. It just was done. And how George got it, I don't know. I have my ideas how he got it through his contacts, but that was 2009, and it's pretty thorough. There are some inaccuracies in it based on our recollection, but it was a pretty thorough report.
Okay, and so you confirm most of those details from your point of view, but how was your Tic Tac, I'm saying your, meaning the event on November 14th, knowing that the next 4 are the ones that got the video, but how was your Tic Tac video chosen for this release to the stars? And I'm asking because of the confusion and the attacks that began a couple of weeks after December 16th, saying that there was chain of custody problems, that one of the videos had gone to a German video office or a production office, and therefore chain of custody and control of the Pentagon had been broken. So what is your perspective on those criticisms that the video, one of the video had chain of custody broken from the Pentagon, and the other, the so-called gimbal, the shorter one, has 2 pilots' voices, and they are talking about their, I had it right here.
Yeah, talking about what they see. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and they are saying that, here it is. Yeah, that's a effing drone, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the situational awareness, which is the SA. And the one pilot responds, my gosh, and pilot 2, they're all going against the wind. The wind is 120 knots, which is 138 miles an hour out of the west. And the pilot says, well, look at that thing, dude. And that's not LNS now, is it? It's, and maybe you can let the audience know what LNS is for a jet pilot. That was the translation. That is an LNS. And we thought it was maybe some...
Oh, I think it's INS.
Well, it's some
pilot inertial system.
Oh, okay. So it was translated as INS or LNS. So if it's INS,
we can pull up the wind aloft in the airplane. It does a wind triangle, so it knows how fast you're going, and it calculates the wind triangle, which the difference is going to be the wind, and it all goes in. So it'll tell us in the system. And the airplanes have incredibly good navigation systems in them. So when it comes up and tells you the wind is going 140 knots in this direction, it's usually within a couple of knots. I mean, it's probably within 1 knot. I mean, they're that accurate. So
okay, so it's the inertial system, and the other pilot says, "Well, the FLIR," and then he's interrupted by the other pilot saying, "Look at that thing; it's rotating." And in that video, you see we'll call it disc-shaped or oval-shaped object, rotate 180 degrees, and there was information it didn't lose altitude. Well, this is this video with the pilots' voices has had several criticisms. One, people argue that the pilots' voices were put in artificially, and the second is that Metabunk argues that when they go back and forth and click between airplanes and this particular gimbal, that it is an airplane. And I'm sure you've seen these arguments. Can you start out with whether or not you think that these voices were edited into this short tape?
Oh, no, that's them talking. Having listened to, thousands of these tapes, that's authentic. I mean, it's not, I mean, there's no reason you can listen to them talk the way, I mean, that's literally how we talk to each other. I'm not going to get into all the expletives that went on in ours, but, the conversation between the airplanes of, what is that? And holy, oh my God, there's lots of comms going on the radios that we're all talking to each other. So, when I first saw the gimbal video, I was like, yeah, that's pretty realistic. I mean, and you can hear their voices go up. There's a third video. I don't know if you've seen it. It's on To the Stars, but it's one of these objects low over the water going pretty fast, and you can hear how his voice actually starts to go up a little bit because you get pretty excited when you see things. And we were the exact same way. We went from calm. The other pilot will say, it's a very junior pilot, but that was flying the other airplane. So here you are. You've been in the squadron a short period of time. You're flying on the skipper's wing. You're going out to do a training exercise, and all of a sudden you get told you're doing, hey, we're going to cancel. We're going to suspend training. You're going to go do this real-world vector. Now think where we're at. We're off the coast of San Diego. You got a lot of drug runners up there. Customs flies around in airplanes with radars to try and track stuff. So all of a sudden we've got something that we're going to go track. So there's some excitement. Hey, we're going to get to do something real. That's cool. So we go out, we get to a merge plot, you don't see anything, and next thing you know, we start looking down and we see a disturbance in the water. So now I want you to think that you're a relatively new pilot, you got a pretty experienced person in your backseat, and you look down and all of a sudden you see this disturbance, which looks like something is, there's something under the water that's creating these waves to break. So now you immediately think, well, whatever we were coming to see crashed. It's sinking. And now it's going from a real-world mission to a search and rescue mission. So as we're looking at this, then we see the Tic Tac. And you go from, cool, do something real, to, search and rescue, to, what is that? And That's something I have never, ever seen. And I'm limited in my experience. And aviation I used to tell people it's like a basket, and every time you do something cool, it's almost like life. You get knowledge that goes in the basket. And the more you experience, the more you have to call on when you get into situations. So you can go, I've done this and this worked, or I did this and that didn't work, so I don't want to do that again. And it's a learning process. And and even after 18 years of flying, when I finally retired, it was still a learning process. And I was learning not only from people with my level of experience, but people that were junior to me, because everyone has a bad day. So you're constantly learning. So now you've got this new pilot that goes through all this, and they're trying to get this knowledge and this learning, and all of a sudden you go from one emotion to another emotion to another emotion. And and everyone we all saw the same thing. We all had this exact same experience. It's just the emotions that we all went through when it happened are relative to the experience level and personality too.
And
I just wanted to get that out there.
And why do you think that aviation was in one of the Pentagon office titles that the Washington Post and Politico reported, but the New York Times on the same date had advanced aerospace? What do you think is the reason for aerospace, New York Times, aviation, Politico, Washington Post, and the confusion ever since?
I think it's just a typo. I can tell you that I've told this story to reporters, and some of them did a great job and pretty much got everything I wrote. And then I've told other people this is literally, and I haven't talked to that many people, where you see it and it says something else. I think, some certain things we try and look into, we try and look for the hidden meaning. I don't think there's a hidden meaning at all. I just think, someone put aviation and someone put aerospace. If you want the truth, I could probably get a hold of Lou and ask him exactly what it was called while he was there, because I talk to him quite often.
Yeah, do and report back to me, and I will report. And after this short break, let's come back and let's talk about the fact that people like John Greenwald, who have filed Freedom of Information Act requests to everybody out there, they report that they have gotten no records found as the answer on both Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program and Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program. After this break.
Once again, here's Linda Moulton Howe. Linda?
Thanks, Race. And Commander Fravor, we were talking before the break about the difference between Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program and Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program, and that the difference between aerospace and aviation has been picked up by various critics. On May 19, 2018, John Greenewald, founder and producer of the Black Vault website that specializes in filing Freedom of Information Act inquiries about UFO-related matters with many, many different agencies, he reported his concerns about what he called the evolving ATIP releases, and that he raised in his Black Vault the whole issue of why would they have aerospace in one report and aviation in another. He also reported that he made a lot of FOIA inquiries and that he received no records found as his replies to his inquiries about both advanced aerospace and advanced aviation. So he FOIA'd on both names of the alleged office in the Pentagon run by Luis Elizondo, and that he shows that he got no records found from the Department of Defense, the National Security Agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the U.S. Navy. And in the Navy reply, it said, ATIP receives the cases from various different channels. So where our office sat at the top of the office, he's quoting Luis Elizondo, of the Office of the Secretary of Defense, we had multiple avenues of approach. So you had in some cases reporting that would come up through Navy channels. In other cases, it would come up through Air Force channels. In other cases, it would come up through the intelligence community. And as the focal point, if you will, for this capability, all roads, I guess, lead to Rome. In this particular case, all roads led to our office regarding the phenomena, talking about advanced aerospace or advanced aviation. Now, that's the paragraph from Lou Elizondo's work on the record that John Greenewald sent in a FOIA request to the Department of the Navy on March 14, 2018. And he asked for all photographs, videos, reports, letters, memos, and so forth that were sent by your agency to the Office for the Secretary of Defense, the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, the Defense Intelligence Agency, in regards to the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program, or ATIP, also referred to as the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, also known as ATIP. And then he says that what he received back from the Navy in his FOIA request was no records. So this is one of the leverage points about the confusion currently in the public, is how could this all be real in the Pentagon, but that those offices send back replies that say no records. What do you think?
Well, let me start with it. I'll give you my opinion, but I don't speak for the Department of Defense, Navy, Air Force, Army, Marines, any of that. Marines are part of the Navy, but let me say this. So you send in a request, and one, who got the request and who was answering the request. And then how much work do they really put in to go find you information that you thought existed, and they don't have firsthand knowledge of it, so they just send you back, we don't have anything. I can tell you that I was called by the Navy within the last 2 years if I knew of anything, because someone had a FOIA request out there that said, do I know anything about the incident? My answer is anything official that was done, I do not know. And I did not. There was nothing official that I knew of. I know that the intel reports from Civic, because a lot of that stuff has to go through a declassification process if it's classified, and if it's classified and it's not declassified, it's not coming out. And I'm not saying that this was classified, so I don't want people misquoting me,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying that if you request classified documents, it's not coming out. If you request a document that is privileged information from an investigation, then a lot of it will get redacted, and you're going to get blank pieces of white paper with black lines all over it, where they've inked them out. So I cannot speak for why he got an answer of 0, but the DoD is a pretty large organization, and who gets your FOIA request and who has firsthand knowledge and how much work do they really want to put in to try and find you that information. This is what people, and I understand that the public has a want to know, but on the other hand, those people at the Pentagon have jobs, and their only job is not to run around and find you information. So they go, look, I've got 15 minutes to spend on this. If I can't find any in the first 15 minutes, you're going to get what I found. So if it's not readily available, or I can't do a quick search through an archives, that's the answer you're going to get. Does that mean there's nothing out there? I don't know. But we get the same answers in life where you call and you go, hey, do you have this? And the store or whoever you're talking to goes, no. And you start searching your own, and you figure out, oh, they do have it, and it's in this shelf on this aisle.
And Commander, do you think you're saying, I don't know of anything official that then somebody in the Navy or Air Force or the Department of Defense would take that as it didn't happen?
No, I don't think they said it didn't happen. They just, I was called specifically by the Navy if I knew of anything for this incident that was an official, do I know of any official reports? Because they couldn't find anything. And I said, no, I don't. Of the one thing that I knew that got released by George Knapp was not an official report, and it was not releasable through FOIA.
And if the FOIAs are getting back no records found replies to various people who are sending in FOIAs, how do you think that your Tic Tac video and the gimbal video were chosen for release to the stars in the first place, and how did that whole process occur? Can you take us inside of your meetings with Luis Elizondo?
Yeah, I can tell you that, obviously the video that you have seen of the incident that we had was taken off of the Civic Drive back in 2000 and probably 2008, and it was put on strangeland.com and then ended up on youtube.com. Matter of fact, I used to send people the link because I tell them the story and I go, oh, no, here's the link. And then all of a sudden it became one of those, you got to have a password to get it. I don't know how that happened, and I never called YouTube to ask, but somehow something ended up. So the release of the video for my incident had already been out there. I don't know how Lou worked that. I don't know if he worked while he was still there, knowing that he was going to leave, and retire, if he got those declassified, because, obviously the AT FLIR when it first came out was that way, but now there's so much video of it out there from stuff that we've done that they've just decided, hey, it's not, you can let that go. And because all 3 videos that are released and on the To the Stars website are, they're all off of F-18s, and they're all AT FLIR videos, so they're the same quality. Other videos out there, I don't know. I can honestly say I have not seen any other videos that, there are rumors that exist. I can honestly say I have not seen those. But how Lou got those, how he worked it, I don't know. He was there. He probably had the ability to work that and get those declassified before he left. Maybe it was a cooperation, knowing that he was leaving. And the work that Tom did to get the government to admit that they had actually actively been investigating, recently UFOs, obviously after Project Blue Book ended. I don't know. I'd like to say that, there's obviously some work done to do that. I think it was all within the right channels, and they said, this is kind of there's no harm to release these videos to show something and allow the public to see what's been going on. I don't think there's a conspiracy or anyone tried to rig it or anything like that. I just think those were the 3 videos chosen, and I don't know what else is out there.
Well, when can you explain what we were talking about in the break of your meeting, your sit-down meeting with people from the New York Times and Lou Elizondo? What was the framing of what they wanted to accomplish? How was that presented to you?
Okay, let me just couch. I first, my wingman actually had been contacted multiple times by Lou. They called me. I said, just give my number. So Lou called me. He was still at the Pentagon at the time. Said, hey, we want to talk to you. I said, okay. He shortly thereafter left the Pentagon. He came out with 2 to Stars with Tom and that whole group, and called me up and said they were coming up here. So him, Tom DeLong, and a guy, Chris Mellon. Chris is a former Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, who is with 2 to Stars also. I don't know if I think he consults with them.
Yes.
Yes. They met me in a hotel not far from my house. They came up for the day. We sat down, we spent a couple of hours. I allowed them to record me. So Tom had brought a camera with him, really nice one. You can see it on 2 to Stars. It's, I don't know how many minutes. It's cut down. I think it's 7 minutes long. We talked for hours. They just kind of edited it down. There were certain things, because every once in a while I'll talk, and some of the people that don't want their names out there, their names came out. So they had to edit all that stuff out. So if it looks like the video is chopped a little bit, it's intentionally chopped that way. But they edited it so it's kind of a flow of the same story that I gave at the beginning of this broadcast. We talked about the incident. We talked about what I thought it might be. Lou showed me the gimbal video, and he showed me the other video, and said that these were going to come out. And I said, okay, if you need me, let me know.
And
so
Commander, in that discussion, as he's talking to you and asking you what you think the Tic Tac was, and he's showing you the gimbal video with the 2 pilots talking about the thing that does the rotation, did you that night discuss specifically that these are intelligences that are not human?
No, they asked me actually what I thought. They said, what do you think? I to be honest, I don't think, and I said this earlier, I don't think that we could develop a technology, although we have developed technologies that we've kept hidden, I don't know how long the 117 was flying around before they acknowledged that it existed. I mean, I was like, and I'd been flying, and I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. But as far as that goes, I don't ask, nor do I speculate on that. But I would like to think that, this is 14 years ago. I'd like to think after 14 years, if we had something like that it would be out, or at least, in some type of realm that's going to help mankind. There's a lot of stuff that came out of NASA when we went to the moon. You think, there's a lot of stuff going on there because we kept it relatively secret because it was a space race. But it still benefited. Simple things like Velcro. I mean,
right.
That's a pretty good invention that we use a lot in life today, but that was actually developed for space. So I think that's right.
But Commander, we do not function as physical beings in aircraft. You would know this as much as anybody possible. We can't go from 80,000 feet to 20,000 feet in a couple of seconds.
Well, no, if we think of the how we are used to flying, like we're in a pressurized cabin and all that. But on the other hand, I don't know, if you look at the gimbal, it almost looks like there's almost a little aura around the object as it's rotating. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Right. Video? That aura.
If you look at it. So, yeah, well, what is that aura? I'm not a theoretical physicist, but I would say, you could speculate and say, well, what if that is actually like some type of field around and you don't feel the forces? It's right. Almost relative to you inside and how this thing's moving. I don't know. I mean, I've had people say, actually, one of my friends his cousin is a theoretical physicist, PhD at a very prominent East Coast university, and probably one of the best universities in the country, who said that it's impossible because the closest Goldilocks planet, which is a planet that revolves around a star similar to our sun, that would be where water would maintain a liquid form. And we've been searching around. You hear it on the news quite a bit. is, X number of light years away, and it would be impossible to get here. And I said, it's only impossible if you think in the form that we know. And I can go back and say, well, 100 years ago, people thought Einstein was kind of nuts, in some of his theories, and it was constantly trying to disprove them. And only do we know now, we're still going through proving again that he was 100% correct in what he theorized. But at first, when he came out with them, he was not all accepted. So I would say there's a lot of stuff that we know what we know. We know the fundamentals of physics that we think are the basis of everything, but we don't understand dark matter. We don't understand dark energy. They're in our equations, but we really can't explain them. So there's a whole thing that we're still trying to discover. And I would say, and until we do that and we can explain everything, because, from a scientist's standpoint, if we can't prove it, then it's not real. But there was times when we didn't have the technology, or we haven't thought to that point or out of the box to prove it. I would say that there's, if we're all done learning, then let's just stop. But I would like to say there's a lot of stuff that we don't know, and we need to keep doing it. And that could very well prove that these energy sources are possible, and that this type of travel is possible. So,
and Commander, if other life in the universe is logical, that it doesn't make sense that we on Earth are the only intelligent life in this 13.8 or 9 billion light year universe, why do you think on planet Earth that it is one of the most sensitive subjects since World War II to talk honestly about all of the various facets, of which there are many, that would indicate that there is or are other alien presences, both on our planet, interacting with our planet, throughout the solar system and beyond? Why should that be a secret?
Well, let me, because I know we're getting tight on time, but let me just throw this out there. Okay, so, and I've said this before, that obviously you just pointed out that we live in an infinite universe. There's millions and millions and probably billions of stars.
Trillions.
But we have a hubris as human beings to think that we're it and we're the best, and and we're the only one. But yet one of the greatest minds, and actually I think the greatest mind of modern times, Stephen Hawking, who just passed away, he even said that that he believed in life outside of Earth, and that we should investigate to try and find it.
Right.
Don't you ask? And now this is literally one of the most brilliant minds ever. And I'm not going to get into religious, but I go, I was talking to a friend of mine, and I said, he had ALS. He had ALS when I was in college back in the 80s, okay? Most people don't live that long. Think about it. With Lou Gehrig's disease, you don't live that long. But yet he managed to live all the way up until, his recent passing with a debilitating disease. And I always think, well, maybe there's a reason. Maybe God kept him around for a reason, because he was truly a brilliant mind. And the one disease that he could have that would be that debilitating, the one thing it didn't affect was a brain that was incredible and was doing theoretical physics in his mind, and all he had was the use of one eye. And I look at that, and I look at, because I truly respect what he did, and then we look and say, well, here's a guy who's brilliant, he understands this, but at least he's opened his mind to say there is a possibility. You can't disprove it just because you haven't found it yet, because we look through a soda straw into space at these distant galaxies, and we try and calculate based on, physics to say there could be something here, there could be something here. We know there's something there, we just haven't seen it yet. There's a lot of stuff, you're scanning billions through a soda straw.
Right.
You could miss it in the blink of an eye, you'd miss it, and it wouldn't be there.
And Commander, it is that physicist, that cosmologist, Stephen Hawking, who in the last 2 or 3 years before he passed, he was warning, saying he did not think it was smart for Earth to be sending a lot of radio signals out, because he said we don't know what could be on the other end. And I find it ironic that we are talking about this issue of the titles of the Pentagon office, whether it was aerospace or aviation threat identification program. It sort of leads to an inevitable question. Have you since 2004 and the incident, have you had other pilots talk to you confidentially or publicly about other radar jamming incidents with UFOs since November 14th, 2004?
Not exactly, but I've had lots of people contact me with their stories of, I was in the military, I saw this, I saw that. Some of them are significantly older. Some of those videos are significantly newer. But here's, let me close with this as we close out, because I think this is important. We don't know what they are. We don't even know where they're from. What if they could be from another country? I don't know. But we don't know what they are. There's not much we can do with them because they kind of come and go at will. They can defeat all of our defensive systems. And I would say, one, if it turns out, let's say let's just speculate and say they're from another planet. Okay, so if it's ET, then we're all good. Close Encounters, we're all good. If it's Independence Day, we're not so good. War of the Worlds, we're not so good, right? So let me ask this. Does it really cost that much to investigate this? So from a U.S. standpoint, we put $22 million into the ATIP program over a 5-year period, which is $4.4 million a year. And $4.4 million a year isn't even in the rounding year. They just put in for a $750 billion defense budget. Okay? So if you go, hey, we can throw 10, 20, 50, $100 million at it, in the big picture of things in government spending, it's in the wash. It's like me giving someone $1 to go get an ice cream cone. Is it going to affect me? No, it's not.
Commander, right here, though, many people who have been trying to study the unidentified aerial phenomena for decades say that is why the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program in the Pentagon is like a theatrical window dressing covering up a huge secret space program that has been evolving since World War II, and that it has consumed trillions of dollars, and that this was something that would be like publicly accessible ATIP for the reason of trying to open up the truth, but protecting and keeping the gigantic black space program still unseen, unheard, and hidden.
I'd argue the point. I'd say we're probably too myopic. I think we're more worried about our own defense as far as dealing with other countries, and all the way up through the 80s and the Reagan buildup, it was dealing with the former Soviet Union, and now you've obviously got Russia is on a buildup, China's on a huge buildup. And I think that's where our focus is at, because it's really the defense of what's the closest alligator to the canoe. So I would argue that point. The other one is for the guys that are John, the FOIA requesting, try and debunk it, pull up the budget. That's FOIA releasable, and you can look at all the budget lines and figure out. But, when people say trillions and trillions of dollars, eventually you start to figure out where the money's going. You can go, that's not adding up. But, you start to get into speculation. Speculation starts rumors. Rumors get people all angst instead of, let's just look at the facts and go, can we learn from these things? I would say yes. Can we try and advance our technology and look at areas of physics that we haven't spent a lot of time or money on? And I would say yes. And if something good comes out of it to where, like I said, we get a power source that allows us to change the life for mankind, if we look at it, even if you said we're going to look at it from a defense standpoint, but we get something that changes the world, it's a game changer. We basically leapfrog. Think of the technologies that came from space. Think of the technologies that came when we started really investing in computing power. 10 years ago, you'd have said an iPhone, you're going to have everything on your phone. It's going to be a computer, and people would scratch their head and go, do I really need that? I remember when they were trying to make flip phones as small as possible. And now you got iPhones that you do everything. And the generation that my kids grew up on, that they don't really care about TV. They have their iPhones. They have everything at their fingertips. So the world is changing fast, and I would say as fast as it changed in those realms, if we put our focus and we look at some of the technology, we can advance ourselves to that next level. And relatively in the big budget world, probably a lot less money than a lot of people think.
I want to thank you, Commander David Fravor, both for your courage and your service in the U.S. Navy and for your brilliant articulation as the firsthand person up in that F-18 back on November 14th, 2004, trying to understand something that was not knowable and reporting about it with such clarity today. We need hundreds more of you in these reports, because we are in a revolution and we are moving to a completely different relationship with our planet and the solar system and the universe. And you have played a really, really big role. Thank you, sir, so much.
You're quite welcome, Linda. Thank you for having me on.
Next week on Phenomenon Radio, Peter Robbins makes a return appearance here on The Big Show. And for John Burroughs, who is off tonight, Linda Moulton Howe, our very honored guest Navy Commander David Fravor, I am Race Hobbs saying thanks for listening. Don't go anywhere, folks. 3 more hours of live programming with Fade to Black and Jimmy Church, live right here on the station that brings you the very best in paranormal radio content on the internet, KGRAradio.com. Have a great night and a great weekend, everybody.